host, it's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of Rabbit Hole Radio. I am your host, Popeye. It is January 15th, 2022, and I have a very interesting, information-packed broadcast for you tonight. Before I get into the nitty-gritty and I bring my guest on, I just want to let everybody know that tonight's guest is going out of his way, and his family is going through some stuff, and I will leave it at that. I will leave it up to him if he wants to share. But his wife, Kendra, is one of my longest listeners. She's been listening to the broadcast since I've been doing radio, and even longer than like I was friends with John and her. So I would really appreciate y'all if everybody could send prayers and love for her out into the universe. And if it's up to John if he wants to share, what the deal is, but she's going through some medical stuff, and I would appreciate if you would send her some love. And I know Kendra's tuned in, so I want to say, Kendra, thank you for tuning in again, even though you're going through all this. I appreciate you, and thank you for giving us the wisdom of your husband for 2 hours tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me bring back to the airwaves my good friend, my brother from another mother, Sergeant John Shirley. John, welcome back.
Wow. I don't even know what to say to that. Popeye, thank you for having me again. It's a little bit interesting for me. My wife has been fighting cancer actively for about a year now, and but I will say, thanks to a lot of prayers of thousands of people, we're fully expecting a full recovery, and so she's doing great. We expect to actually be heading home in just a couple of days, so everything's going fantastic. But thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on while all of this was going on. I wasn't even going to bug you, and then you were like, "Hey," you hit me up because, ladies and gentlemen, John and I are actually very good friends, and we chat a lot behind the scenes, quite often. And John hit me up and was like, "Hey, I was on Jones today," and I was like, "About what's going on with Oathkeepers and Stewart Rhodes?" And he's like, "Yes." And I was actually going to reach out to him, but I didn't want to bug him. Then I was like, "Okay, you want to come on?" And John was very gracious and offered to come on for not 1 hour, but 2 hours, because it's going to take some time to go over what we need to cover tonight. And I want to give him as much time as he needs to talk. Unfettered, uninterrupted. We're only going to have a break at the top of the hour. So it'll give John as much time as he needs to get into all the details. So what are we talking about tonight? The False Flag Insurrection that happened last January 6th. That's what we're going to be discussing. And him and I have been meaning to do a broadcast like this for a while. And then things kind of kicked into high gear with the arrest of Stuart Rhodes. So we decided it was really time to kind of do a broadcast where we covered our thoughts on that whole debacle. And I've said since the beginning that it was a false flag operation. Not meaning Antifa was in there. I know that was that myth and that idea was thrown out there immediately to muddy the waters, so that way people wouldn't look at the idea that could have been another Fed-run thing. But I don't want to get too deep into it without bringing Sarge on and getting his thoughts on it first, because that's why he's here, and we've only got him for 2 hours. So, Sarge, you know how I feel about the false flag insurrection, as I call it. I totally think it was an event that was done to demonize, anyone that's quote unquote in the patriot movement, truth movement, because they lump everybody together, and it was made to look it was done to make everyone look stupid and like we're terrorists, which is what they already call us, but they needed a physical meme. But it was also done to there was things going on that it was done to push people on scene into that building to do what they did. And I mean, if that's an insurrection, come on. I mean, it's the word. It's like the LARP-surrection. It was ridiculously.
I'm glad you used that phrase. I'm glad you used
it is.
that
It's
phrase.
the LARP-surrection.
And we're going to get to LARPing. Okay. Where to start? I'm going to give you a quick summary of what we're going to cover first before we get into details. I think by the end of this conversation, people are going to see that not only was or is to a large degree Antifa a LARP, but the events of January 6th, in retrospect, given what I observed myself in leading up to January 6th, and just to be clear, I was not in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. I actually resigned my position with Oathkeepers in late November, shortly after the election, because of the events that I'm about to describe. But I believe that the events of January 6th were completely for the public consumption of those who were glued to their televisions and who've been glued to their televisions ever since January 6th occurred. Because not only do I think that Antifa is a LARP, but I think January 6th itself was a LARP. It was for public consumption. It was going to be in the minds of what I would like to call the cabal, and that doesn't have a political designation behind it. I just think that they decided it was time that they finally they pulled their own Reichstag event. And if I don't know if people out there have researched it, if not, you look up the Reichstag fire that led to Germany turning over the reins of power to Hitler and the Nazis. Not that I'm saying that the new Nazi party is springing up in the United States, but maybe it is. But I believe that the January 6th event was for public consumption to create a trauma in the minds of the public and try to demonize the whole idea of loving your Constitution or even necessarily loving your country. So that's the overview. And then we can get granular from there if you'd like to.
Well, I want to rewind time for a bit because there's an important story that people need to hear before we get into all of this. And you had mentioned that. And when this whole thing happened, I mean, you and I were like, within a couple hours, it was like, did you see what's going on? Yeah, I guarantee you it's like a Fed-run operation, and you and I were both in agreement. And then, it's Antifa pretending to be conservatives. No, you see, that's how they muddy the water. So that way, if you say, well, I think it was a false flag operation, people go, oh, what do you think it was Antifa? You're one of those people. No. And they could have used somebody that was also used as an agent provocateur in the Antifa movement. Okay. So do I believe that there were agent provocateurs in the crowd? Yes. I'm not stupid. I know how things work. I mean, you'd have to be really, really ignorant and to not understand what's going on. The people that don't want to believe it, it's because you're allowing your innate tribalism in your brain to take over and push your logic down. It's not allowing logic to come to the forefront of your mind, your base level thinking. There were feds in that crowd. I'm sorry, don't be tribal. There were feds in that crowd. This isn't about Donald Trump or anything else. And Trump is a meme. He's a meme at this point. He was a meme as a president, okay? It's not about that. It's about vilifying people that associate the Constitution, love for the Second Amendment, love for their country. You could call it nationalism. They'll use that because of the Nazis, but they want to equate everybody that's about freedom and pro freedom. If you question the government, if you don't want to take a vaccine or you don't want forced vaccination, you're a terrorist. And they needed a physical meme because they just didn't have one. They kept referring to years to McVeigh. They didn't have a modern day McVeigh. And now, I mean, what happened on January 6th wasn't even a hundredth of what happened in Oklahoma City. It's ridiculous to even compare that event to like 9/11 or other events, but they will because they needed that physical meme. So, John, months before there was an event that you were at, and there was some chicanery going on, and we need to cover this because it's going to get into what I want to get into about some of the actors, so to speak, of January 6th. We need to rewind a bit because one of those people is someone that is known to both of us. So I'm going to give you the floor and let you explain to the listeners the story.
Okay. Well, very, very quickly, I'm going to rewind even further. For those who haven't been involved with this movement or haven't paid much attention to this point, Oathkeepers has been around since about 2009, and throughout this, you'll pick up what Oathkeepers is all about. I'm not here to advertise for Oathkeepers. I'm not a member of the Oathkeepers anymore. Oathkeepers started out in 2009. I joined before the actual official rollout, but after all the guys who actually came up with the concept had decided upon it on the freerepublic.com website, one of the forums. I heard about it sometime in early 2009, and I actually got online and created the first Facebook page for Oathkeepers that ever existed before I was even a member or ever talked to anybody. And I actually had to go apologize to some of the board of directors people at the time because I put their name on something that didn't belong, that should have belonged to them and belonged to me. Long story short, I was the leader of the Texas Oathkeepers for several years after 2009, and then probably in about 2012 or so, I was asked to be part of the board of directors of Oathkeepers. I've known Stuart Rhodes personally from an online sense since 2009, and he and I would call us friends. We were friends for almost 10 years, and so that would bring us up effectively to 2018, 2019. Oathkeepers went through a evolution from its beginning. We absolutely started out 100% as a teaching organization. When I joined and what I signed up for was an organization whose primary mission was to provide training and instruction to current and former law enforcement and military members about, they swear their oath to the Constitution or swear their oath to God to protect and support and defend the Constitution. All of us raise our right hands before we ever do act number one as government employee. But what seems to happen, and which we've seen if you watch the media, is that in time, guys either never actually understood what that oath meant, which is probably the case, or they forget. And I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt because, like me, they probably were pretty ignorant of the Constitution when they first raised their right hand. But officers and soldiers are the point of the spear for the government. That's where the rubber meets the road. It doesn't matter how many laws you pass in Washington, D.C. or in Austin, Texas, until you have somebody who actually is going to enforce that rule, enforce that law against somebody. Person is there enforcing it, it means nothing. So the Oathkeepers were there to remind those with the firearms that, you know what? You raised your right hand and said you would support and defend this for anything else. You weren't raising your hand to support the chief of police. You weren't raising your hand to support the sheriff. You weren't raising your hand to support the president or the Congress or the Supreme Court. You're raising your hand to support the Constitution, and the Constitution points directly back to the people. So in essence, if you take an oath to the Constitution, you take an oath to the people, to support and defend the people. And Oathkeepers existed to remind officers and soldiers that was their point of existence, is to support the people.
And by the way, that's why I joined. Not to interrupt you, but that's why I joined. And that exactly. Because I was a member of Oathkeepers. I was a dues paying member for years, and I used to promote them. And I used to appreciate what the OG original idea of Oathkeepers was. I can't say that I agree now, and that's why I'm no longer a part of the organization myself too. So no, but that's exactly why I had joined. You guys created it. John was one of the co-founders of it, one of the original people back when it first started, and he got involved with it. And it was, once you guys became bigger and started reaching out and expanding, that was when my generation of veterans that joined Oathkeepers got involved in it. That was back in 2008, 2009. So anyway, go back. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you're good. You're good, Popeye. Absolutely. I think that as an organization, it was rocking along just fine. We were growing. I know at one point I was told, and once again, remember, this was for the most part an online organization. Very few of the members in mass ever really actually knew each other face to face. You had small, I say small, you had groups in different areas that had membership that would meet routinely or time to time. But for the most part, it was an online entity. Well, that changed. In my memory, the first time was when the Bundy Ranch situation kicked off. And Popeye, I don't remember what year that was. Do you remember what year the Bundy Ranch stuff was?
It was 2013, 2014. It was that time period.
That sounds about right. That's kind of the first, what I would call direct action. I mean, and that's a word I borrow from the left. But I don't have another word for it at this point. But that's kind of when Oathkeepers stuck their toe into the whole direct action thing. And Stewart even has said since Bundy Ranch that it was a mistake to be involved in Bundy Ranch because some of the primary actors in Bundy Ranch were not right in their heads. But that was kind of the first foray into it. And back then, I didn't get involved in Bundy Ranch. I didn't go, buying plane tickets or anything. I was concerned, like Stewart and so many other patriots, about kind of some of the details of what went on at Bundy Ranch, but I wasn't flying out there. But that was kind of the first foray outside of just the teaching organization part. And at the time, I guess I was not totally against it, but I thought, that's not really what we signed up for. Well, then there were several years where nothing happened. The organization went through some changes, went through some different board of directors members would quit and come on. And to be honest with you, I wasn't super active with the organization. I was on the board the entire time, and we would have board meetings occasionally to vote on some things, but sometimes it was quite a few months between meetings.
Right, and that was during the Trump years, which backs up my whole assertion as to why he was put in. Because 2 years before he was in, you had the Bundy Ranch situation, and you had veterans who know how to use firearms in elevated positions standing off with federal agents, and the feds backed down. They blinked first, and that set a precedent. And whether or not there were, like you said, there was a lot of weirdness going around in that situation too. And that you had that crowd 2 years later, they were now, like I've said to you, the guy that flies the come and take it flag and the thin blue line flag out of the back of the pickup truck, meaning their brain is living in two different worlds. They're not realizing what they're thinking about. They don't get that the police would be nationalized and then used against the people to disarm the public, right? They don't get that the military would be used. So the same people that 2 years before got that are now, because Trump's in office, tribal, their boy.
Well,
I love it. I love it.
You're
I love
right.
the police
You're right
state.
about the tribal aspect, and I'm glad you said that, because part of the evolution, I think, of what Oathkeepers went through when Trump was elected, and of course, it's no secret that law enforcement was kind of glad to see Trump come in after Obama, because of some of the craziness under Obama, hoping that it would be better. But the important thing is, when Trump started his rallies, and there started to be pushback by Antifa or factions on the left, Oathkeepers very quickly filled that gap on the right. And I'm not even going to tell you a number because I don't know, but for a bunch of the Trump rallies, one of the main things that Oathkeepers was doing was providing security at Trump rallies. And when I say security, that's really kind of overstating it. They were there to make sure that Antifa wasn't attacking the attendees of the Trump rallies when they were going to and from their vehicles, because that's when they were most vulnerable. So once again, in retrospect, I'm going through all this stuff in my mind at the same time as I'm telling you all this, because there's so many little bits of data here. They don't always make sense, but sometimes things click. Oathkeepers was integral in helping in the Trump rallies outside of the venues, helping people get to and from vehicles. And so to me, it further shows, the dipping the toe into some kind of direct action. Okay. So they helped the people of Trump rallies, and they did a lot of good. I mean, I remember at the time, I never actually went to one of them, but at the time I remember hearing multiple reports of Oathkeepers doing very notable acts of helping people to get away from or to keep from being involved with Antifa after or before the Trump rallies. So then let's fast forward up to late 2019, Wuhan and COVID. Sometime before COVID hit the shores of the United States, I learned that Stewart was going through a divorce with his ex-wife, and it was really a nasty divorce. When Corona started coming onto the headlines in early 2020, Stewart was basically homeless. And I don't say that as a pejorative at all. Stewart had fallen on some hard times. He had some relationship issues, and he didn't really have a firm place to stay. So, I said, you know what? I'm sure we can figure something out. And he said, I've been wanting to come to Texas anyway, because that's where all the Patriots are and whatever. So Stewart ended up in Texas during COVID, and he was in North Texas doing Stewart's thing. And when I say Stewart's thing, Stewart is more than anything else. He's a promoter. He's an organizer, for lack of a better word. He's a community organizer for the Patriot movement, is how he sees himself. So he'd be gone a lot late at night, going different places in the state to go to rallies and meetings and whatever. And then after COVID kind of came and the first wave came, I no longer saw him or heard from him with any regularity. He was just doing his thing. And so I kind of just considered it, okay, Stewart has considered himself relocated to Texas. And I thought, whatever, that's cool. And he got a girlfriend, and he just did his thing. The election of 2020 happens. Oh, go ahead, Popeye. If you have something to say, go ahead.
I spoke to you at that time too. We did a broadcast during that period where he was living at your house.
It was early May.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And of 2020. Yep. And we discussed a lot of things. COVID related, police state related, Oathkeepers related. And I can attest that he was living with you at the time that this was going on. And all this is important because Stewart obviously was recently arrested and charged with conspiracy and sedition. So, by the way, what was he charged with, John? Conspiracy. Oh, I thought that meant fake. No, folks, it means two or more people getting together to do something bad. And, oh, look, the government actually charged somebody with it publicly and is now making a big deal out of it. Can we all stop misusing the word? Anyway, sorry, I had to throw that in there because it's like right in your face. There's the point I've been making for years. So anyway, it's important because he got arrested. Right. And we have to lay the groundwork because we're going to be discussing Stewart. So we need to lay the groundwork, but I can attest personally and vouch for what John is saying that yes, Stewart was living there at the time because we did this broadcast with the late great Kev Baker
that's right.
On his show, and R.I.P. Kev, and he allowed us to do like 3 hours, a little over 3 hours on his show on YouTube, and we did this really great broadcast, and at that time, and I can say this with all certainty because I went back and actually listened to the 3 hours of it today while I was working in my yard to verify this, to make sure my memory wasn't failing me, that the ideas going back to at least 2020 were the same, at least they appeared to me to be the same as they were from the very beginning of the group and of the movement of Oathkeepers, and why I joined and what I agreed with. They weren't fringe; they were constitutional. Hey, you signed up to defend the Constitution and the people. That's what this is about. It was about, like you said, John, it was about educating people. And still at that point, it really wasn't about anything more than that. There was no craziness. The entire interview was, about Oathkeepers and what was presently going on, our predictions, but then our solutions were, let's, grow your own food, get chickens, try to get land.
Well, and I remember at the time we had the conversation, the push was really for, getting local at your county level, getting a group of people you trust at the county level to discuss important things, to include things like preparedness, things like civil defense. There was no talk of armed insurrections. Are you kidding me? Okay.
No, so not at all. That's why I was like, I actually went back, because I even said to you off air, I said, hey, I went back and I listened to that interview today, and there was nothing there that would, pop out and scream that this was going to happen, like 10 months later. Anyway, I needed to put that in there because this is all in that timeline, and I wanted to add that so that way later on, when we go back and we get into that further, we've already laid that groundwork. So anyway, it's 2020, now he's living with you, and go from there, John.
Okay. I want to make it also want to stop and make a very important distinction. I don't want attention. I don't have a book to sell. I don't have a website to push. I got nothing to push. I'm an elected constable in North Texas. Okay. I have a job to do when I get done taking care of my sick wife. But this is too important just to ignore. And the timing is we have to deal with it is right now. So Stuart stayed with me for a couple of months, and he seemed to have control of his life. And so I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to Stuart. I was looking forward to the 2020 election. I was actually running my own re-election campaign at the time. And so I didn't pay attention much to what Stuart was doing or what was going on. There really wasn't anything going on much with the Oathkeepers. I think they were doing some Trump rallies still, but I wasn't assisting with that. But then we fast forward to after the election. Everybody was disappointed with the election if you were a Trump supporter. I was disappointed because I was a Trump supporter. And but the more important thing to me was I considered our elections were under attack. And I thought that, the American people needed to stand up for their rights. And we watched the left go absolutely bananas for 4 years. At one point, I guess in Portland, they attacked a federal building with fire bombs nightly for a year, culminating, I think, in the murder of a federal law enforcement officer by forces on the left. We've watched our country basically be attempted to be burned to the ground. And finally, the right was saying, you know what? We're mad now because we think this didn't go right. We're going to march. So right after the 2020 election, there was a rally called in Washington, D.C., Freedom Rally. And I don't remember the exact date. I haven't even Googled it. But I know that if you Google it, right after the election, there was the first D.C. rally. Well, I was invited by Stewart to go there. And I believe I went there completely on my own dime. Didn't use anything Oathkeepers that I remember, because that's the way I did it. I didn't spend money for Oathkeepers. I was a volunteer. And so when I did things, I generally did things on my own dime. So I went to D.C. The main event in D.C. was a large protest to occur at the Freedom Plaza on a day, and then everyone was going to march to the square of the Supreme Court and have a rally there. I arrived the day before. Stewart was there. He was talking about all kinds of plans they were making to support in case there was any violence or Antifa or whatever. But my particular job is I was going to assist a group of dignitaries that included Alex Jones to assist them to get through the crowd. And I say assist because if you've ever been in a very large crowd, it's extremely hard to move around with any kind of purpose. Usually you're just kind of at the whim of the crowd, how you move. But when you're dealing with people that have security issues, you got to be more careful than that, especially somebody who rankles feathers like Alex Jones does. My issue with the December rally is that come the day of the rally, which was the next day, I was where I needed to be. I was ready to execute the plan that I had made to assist in this detail to get through the crowd. Stewart was nowhere to be found. Whatever other Oathkeepers, which I didn't know any of the other guys that I had bumped into the day before, none of them were around. It was me. I was the only Oathkeeper. Now there were some other guys there that were helping, and we got Stewart through the we got Alex through the crowd just fine. It was between 750,000 and 1 million people, according to Washington D.C. police that I spoke to on that day. We got through it. It was great. It was a beautiful display of Americans voicing their First Amendment rights. But to me, as a 10-year member of Oathkeepers who had never really had delved much into direct action or action of any sort or anything on the ground with Oathkeepers, I was very disappointed because whatever organization, and when I say organization, I don't mean Oathkeepers organization as in whatever was planned to assist getting the dignitaries through this crowd that Oathkeepers was going to be part of. On the day of the event, it was only me. So we get through this crowd. We get done. I go home. I start questioning, what am I doing? There was supposed to be some big plans of multiple people there with an organized plan to get this done, and we had to make it up on the fly because none of it came through. About that time, they announced the Atlanta rally, which is going to be about a week later, week and a half. I don't remember the exact dates. It's on Google. I was invited to go there by Stuart Rhodes. On my own dime, I went there. Except this time, I did something a little different. And the reason I did something different is because Stuart told me when he invited me to come to Atlanta, he wanted me to be in charge on the ground. Well, I thought, you know what? I have reservations after what happened in D.C. I'm beginning to think maybe that this organization is really more an online organization than it is anything else because there was no organization to the organization on the ground that I saw. So I invited a friend of mine who I knew from a previous employer who had experience and training and the same kind of things I did. In fact, he had more training and more experience than I did. So he was much better suited than me. But I wanted a fresh pair of eyes. I saw some concerns in an organization I've been involved in 10 years. I turned a new page. It was actually participating in something more than it was online. And I didn't like what I was seeing, but I wanted a fresh pair of eyes to back me up, to be a disinterested third party mainly, to tell me if the suspicions I had were warranted or not. And so we went to Atlanta. And we arrived in Atlanta, and I met that evening with Stewart, and there was some disagreement, which it's Stewart and I, we don't agree politically on everything. Stewart actually doesn't care for Donald Trump. He actually doesn't like Donald Trump. So if anybody wants to paint him as some right-wing wackadoodle who is trying to overthrow the government for Donald Trump, I'm sorry to rain on your parade. That's not reality. So Stewart wanted me to be in charge on the ground for Atlanta. And when I met with him the night before the Atlanta rally, I went there with the express purpose of telling him that the person that I brought with me was going to be my assistant that day. He was going to be my number 2 at the rally because I wanted somebody close to me that I trusted being my number 2. And Stewart didn't like that. In fact, he told me that another individual that I think we're probably going to talk quite a bit about, he wanted another individual to be my number 2. And long story short, we didn't agree. I didn't acquiesce. He didn't acquiesce. In fact, going into the day of the rally, I wasn't even sure that myself and the person I brought with me were even going to be there because that's kind of how heated it got. We almost packed up and left. The person that Stewart wanted to be my number 2, it's important, and I'll give you some more identifying information in a minute, but it's important to understand that this person has been identified as person number 10 in all the federal investigation and documents that have been released or leaked. The first time I met person number 10, his name is actually, or according to Mother Jones, who spoke to him apparently, his name is Mike Simmons. When he was introduced to me, he was introduced as Whip, W-H-I-P. That was his nickname. You know, cops and soldiers, we like to go by nicknames sometimes. I'm not much into it, but anyway, he went by Whip. The first time I ever heard mention of Whip was from Stewart in early 2020 or late 2019, one of the two, somewhere in there. He just was talking about this black guy that was a part of the organization, and he was a former cop because he knew that I, since I was law enforcement, I would, find common ground with him. Former cop, he had been railroaded out of his police department, he said, for what apparently was a good shooting, a justified shooting, but he was treated poorly by his department and fired. That's how it was sold to me. At the time I thought that's great. We welcome all, so that's cool. That was in late 2019, early 2020. So then, when I showed up in D.C., and I'm going to apologize for jumping back and forth, but there's so many little details in this. Sometimes you just don't forget everything in the right order. So at the first D.C. rally, I met Whip. I met him the day before the D.C. rally. And then on the day of the D.C. rally, he was supposed to be part of the security detail assisting with Alex Jones. When we left the Freedom Plaza as a group to go toward the Supreme Court in the middle of 750,000+ people, Whip was nowhere to be seen that I remember. And it wasn't until sometime in the midst of the movement that I recognized, he was with us. And one of the reasons why I didn't recognize it is because of his dress. Okay, I was dressed in, if I remember correctly, blue jeans and like a gray fishing, shirt, button-down fishing shirt, a Columbia sportswear shirt, in a hat because it was cold that day. Okay, he showed up. He's in all black. He has a dark backpack. He's got a black baklava pulled up over his nose. And he's got a black skull cap pulled down over his forehead. So he basically looks like he's not a tall guy. They look kind of like a short ninja. And I thought, this is kind of weird dress for this. But honestly, I was too busy doing my job to pay much attention to him. Well, in Atlanta, when Stewart and I butted heads, he wanted Whip to be my number 2 in Atlanta. And I said, no. I said, I want my guy to be number 2 because I know him and trust him. I've known him for more than a decade, closer to 2 decades. I don't know this person, Whip. So at the rally, because of the night before's disagreement, there really wasn't an organized presence of Oathkeepers at this rally. In fact, I actually communicated more with the First Amendment Praetorians on the radio than I did with any of the Oathkeepers, because actually 1AP was doing a better job. They were actually doing their job. But at the rally in Atlanta, I had a team of myself and 2 other guys. The guy I brought with me, who was more experienced and had more training than I did. And the third guy that was also on my team also had more training and more experience than I did. Okay, so I happened to be the lead of this squad, and I was the least experienced of the group. But we watched the events go on, and Antifa did their thing. They were cordoned off by the police away from the patriot part of the rally by physical barriers and by personnel, and having a lot of training in riot control and crowd control. I've been part of those organizing things before, so I knew what to look for. And they did a really good job. And there was no trouble at all. But when the rally broke up, and in my experience, I knew that, the egress from a rally or from a political thing where there's contention, a lot of times that's when the trouble starts. And if you look back at the Trump rallies, that's also the case, which is why Oathkeepers was involved. So after the rally, the police pushed Antifa one direction out of the square. They pushed the Patriots another direction out of the square, right out of the textbook. It's right out of the crowd control textbook. That's what you do. But see, I also knew from my experience that in those cases, those groups are going to get back together at some point, most likely, and they're probably going to be a flashpoint somewhere. And if you know where that flashpoint is, you can sometimes keep it from happening. All right. So I took myself and my 2 team members with me, and I took us to where I assumed the flashpoint was going to be. Well, sure enough, we weren't standing on a corner about 2 or 3 blocks from the square there in downtown Atlanta, right across from the Capitol. We were 2 or 3 blocks from there, and sure enough, not 3 minutes later, Antifa comes around the corner. Now, everybody's seen the video of Antifa doing their riotous stuff all through Trump's administration. We know what it looks like. Molotov cocktails. It's usually in the Northwest, Portland, Washington State. They're really violent. They're really dangerous. They kill people. They do lots of damage. They're actually pretty scary. Well, the Antifa that showed up to Atlanta was not that. When they finally closed the gap in the block that separated us, the 3 guys, and we were just in plain clothes. We didn't display firearms. We just looked like normal Joes standing around the corner watching what was going on. The important thing was we didn't act afraid because we had no reason to be afraid. But when Antifa crossed our paths that day, it was probably about 50 of them. 2 of them were armed with long guns. I believe one was an AR-15. I think the other was a shotgun. They were all dressed in black, trying to look as scary as possible. They all had the best paintball gear money could find for protection. A couple of them had knives, but the most notable things was that the average age was probably about 17. There were some young people there. There were people that were probably 14. I'm not going to say younger because I'm almost 50, so I'm really bad at estimating people's ages. But there were some young people in that Antifa crowd trying to look menacing. In reality, they looked scared and confused more than anything else. It's also notable that their handlers, which if you're around protests on the left very much, you very quickly realize they've got their useful idiots and they've got their handlers. And their handlers were all in their 40s or 50s with gray hair, dressed in like camo gear. Antifa was dressed in, paintball gear at 14 or 15, looking ridiculous. So anyway, they passed us by and immediately started harassing a Trump supporter who happened to be probably between 70 and 80 years old, wearing his red MAGA hat, started harassing him. After they passed us, they crossed the street, started harassing this man. Well, that's kind of why my group was there. So without saying a word to Antifa, without taking any action whatsoever against Antifa, we just all 3 walked up to the old man and guided him across the street and away from the Antifa group. Now, Antifa didn't say anything to us, and we didn't say anything to them. All I can assume is they saw that we weren't scared of them when they passed us by, and they just assumed we were serious men or something. I don't know. But they didn't bug us. So we helped that man get away from them to keep from getting harassed and potentially, I guess, assaulted. And after that occurrence, we followed Antifa around downtown Atlanta for probably 2 or 2.5 hours. I'm not from Atlanta. I wasn't surfing my phone, looking at a map to figure out where I was. I could just tell we were doing lots of left and right turns, and I didn't think we were covering a lot of real ground. But I knew we were walking, and they were bugging people. They were harassing everybody they got a chance to. They were carrying around cans of soup, and I'm assuming it was threatening to throw them at people. But it coalesced. After about 2.5 hours, they stopped marching, and they kind of just congregated on a corner. I guess they were speechifying or something. And my team was probably 50 yards or so away from them and across the street, just watching them standing there. And after a few minutes, a guy comes wandering up toward Antifa from around the corner with his shirt off, and he's screaming at Antifa. And he's screaming obscenities, trying to taunt them, calling them all kinds of words to get them to confront him. And it didn't take long for my team. We quickly talked amongst ourselves. Hey, that was the guy we saw at like 8:30 this morning drinking in the parking lot. where we were parking. He was drunk. We passed him by. You could smell him. Well, that was the same guy. But this time he was antagonizing Antifa. Well, he's screaming at him and yelling at him. And the two people with rifles actually paid attention to what he was saying. And the two Antifa people with rifles, one of them racked the shotgun, which of course gets myself and my two teammates very interested in what's going on because we're afraid a violent confrontation is about to happen. Racks the shotgun. He and the other Antifa guy with the AR-15 start approaching the drunk guy with his shirt off, screaming at him. At this point, I probably was praying at that point that nothing was going to happen. And fortunately, the drunk guy turned around and wandered off. He wandered the other direction, wandered back around the corner, and Antifa went back to their group and continued their little rally or whatever. My group were just standing on the other side of the street just watching. A few minutes later, drunk guy shows back up. This time, screaming and yelling, hollering Antifa, antagonizing them, taunting them, trying to get them to engage with him. Again, a couple of the Antifa members come to approach him. They're exchanging words. We're looking at this thinking, yeah, this is about to get bad. Well, I was on my cell phone several times throughout following Antifa around downtown Atlanta, informing what was designated the Oathkeepers command post in the parking lot where we saw the drunk guy that morning. Telling them, okay, we're following Antifa. They just tried to assault this man. Okay, they're threatening this person. Okay, now they're rallying. You know, can someone else come here? There's only 3 of us. There's 50 of them. We need some backup. Okay. Never at any time did anybody show up to assist, even though there was probably 15 or 20 guys who had showed up to help with the Oathkeepers that day. So now the drunk guy had approached and antagonized Antifa a second time, escalating the event. The parties were getting heated. But again, he broke off contact and wandered off back around the corner around the corner. Antifa goes back to their group. Our team's just watching. Well, the guy comes back around a third time. Except this time, instead of directly approaching Antifa on the sidewalk, he walks across the street behind me and my team, like 5 feet behind us, screaming over our shoulders at Antifa. Now, to me, that's very concerning. Why would he come over to us? Why would he come behind us to start screaming at Antifa? Was it because the first 2 times he didn't actually get a response that he was satisfied with? I don't know. But the third time, he was behind us screaming. And if memory serves me, and I don't remember 100%, something may have been said to that guy. But either way, he wandered off a short time later. In the end, there was no confrontation with Antifa. Their group broke up about 10 minutes later. In fact, several of them, and I'm not being hyperbolic here. Their parents showed up and picked them up. There were several groups where their parents showed up and they obviously were being picked up by their parents. After that happened, we, 3 of us, walked back to the command post, what was designated the command post, which in reality was a panel van that had water and snacks. And it hits all 3 of my team members at the same time, basically. That every time the guy was wandering around the corner after antagonizing Antifa, he was walking basically over to exactly where the Oathkeepers command post was. So then in my mind, wait a minute, the third time he comes behind us, behind my team, goes out of his way and walks behind my team in plain clothes, who are just 3 guys standing around watching what's going on. He comes behind us to antagonize Antifa the third time. It all didn't add up. And it didn't take too many hours after the fact for me and my team members to start talking about this situation. And all 3 of us, with a combined probably 85 years of experience and probably 20 or 30,000 hours of training, all 3 of us pretty much decided we had just been set up or attempted to be set up for a violent confrontation. And all I can say is thank God that nothing happened. Because the headline the next day would have been, rogue cop and government employees shoot and kill 16-year-old Antifa in a firefight. And I'd be going to prison for the rest of my life. I didn't take that well. And so the next day I resigned from Oathkeepers. I can't say who or what exactly transpired that added up to what I consider an attempted false flag violent confrontation. I don't know who did it, but I can tell you that Stewart Rhodes was at the command post. He wasn't the only person. There was other people there too. So it was enough to shake me to my core. I have too much to lose. Okay. I'm not going to be around a bunch of yahoos doing crazy stuff. And so I quit. And subsequently, more discussions with my friends. I'm just more and more convinced that there's something went on in Oathkeepers. Something went on in 2018, 2019, 2020. Something went on. And while I can't say one way or the other whether Stuart Rhodes was actively involved with what went on in my almost confrontation with Antifa, or what kind of involvement he had with whatever went on with January 6th. But what I can say is something was going on in that organization at the very end that was very concerning. And when I recognized that and could put a finger on it, I got away from it really, really fast. But I see my role at this point more like an oral historian. I have a little piece of a puzzle. I can only speak for what I saw and what happened to my team. And thank God nothing violent happened that day, but I do believe that something was going on. And I think that what happened in Atlanta is relevant to what happened on January 6th, not because there's any direct connection, because I quit the day after this happened. But there was some kind of rogue element or somebody pulling the organization rogue as early as that Atlanta rally or that DC rally. And maybe what we saw as a culmination on January 6th. And an important point, very similar to where, I forgot to mention, by the way, Antifa in Atlanta, their big piece of equipment that a bunch of them had were shields. They had shields because they were ready. Except when they passed us by, they walked past us before the confrontation with the old man, we got a good look at their equipment. Those shields were plastic barrels that had been cut up and painted black. So Antifa on the day of the Atlanta rally, Antifa was a LARP. They weren't serious. They weren't there to hurt anybody. They were a bunch of freaking teenagers, I'm assuming, thinking they were changing the world, and rah-rah kumbaya, whatever. They weren't the big
useful idiots, John.
They're useful. Oh, absolutely, they're useful idiots. But they're worse than that because they're props. They're props, and they would have gotten people put in prison because of their props
or killed. I mean, those props themselves. Those 15, 16, 17-year-old kids could have gotten themselves killed. I have to interrupt us because the top of the hour break is going to sneak up on us here for a second.
Well, good. I have to take a breath.
Yeah, that works too. It gives you a few minutes to take a breath. And ladies and gentlemen, this was important. I wanted to give John all the time he had, or that I had to give him, in order to get that out. Because in hour two, we're going to get into January 6th, Stuart Rhodes, and what we see, at least our opinions on the matter. So don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. We'll be right back in a few short minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to hour number 2 of tonight's live edition of Rabbit Hole Radio. I am your host, Popeye. It is January 15th, 2022. And, I always try to throw the date in there. It's important because years later you go back and you listen to these archives. It helps string together events. It helps to, when you look back on things, especially in hindsight, you can go, well, on such and such a date, I did this show and we talked about X, Y, Z or whatever. So that's why I always throw that little date in there. It's good to do that. Anyway, I digress. So I was talking with my good buddy, my brother from another mother. And I mean that wholeheartedly. John knows that. He is my fam.
Absolutely.
He's totally my fam. We've hung out in real life. He's a cool mofo. And he's given us 2 hours of his time tonight, Sergeant John Shirley. And before we get back into it, John, you have a YouTube channel that you'd like to promote, and I want you to give them some love, because they give hell to the local corrupt politicians in your area. So go ahead.
They do, and this was on the lower part of the screen on Alex Jones. That was my group, and I want to be very clear: the Blue Shark Show is not associated in any way with me. They're a group of very dedicated patriots in Hood County, Texas, who on their own decided, you know what, they were tired of the local swamp, like we're all kind of tired of the DC swamp, and they just started their own news gathering show. And they've been taking our swamp to task actively. It's probably been about a year and a half now. And I'll say this, the dividends of their work are paying off big time. So that being said, if you live in a county with a bunch of crooked, good old boys who think they run everything, check out the Blue Shark Show on YouTube and Facebook or Rumble, because they'll show you how you take your local swamp to task and how you drive them away. Because I'm telling you right now, in Hood County, Texas, in 2022, the swamp's being cleaned out. And the candidates who are running for office, they already know it's being cleaned out. They're not even campaigning that hard. It's so poor, so bad. So anyway, I'm plugging the Blue Shark Show because they're a bunch of patriots who are doing the right things in the right places. Live local, beat the swamp local. If we win local, we're going to win at the national level. And that's the plug I got.
Well, I'm glad that you're associated, somehow, with them enough that you are able to plug them.
I had issues with the local swamp where I happen to be an elected official. They hate me and they routinely attack me. So, when you don't have honest news media as part of the mainstream media, it's nice when you've got people who aren't being paid to shill for George Soros. You have people who are doing it because, wow, they actually see what's going on. They're paying attention and they're calling the swamp to task. So anyway, it's a great thing. Please check them out. They work hard and they don't get nearly the recognition they deserve.
Hoorah. So moving on to, or getting back into what we were talking about, but moving on to January 6th. And if you're just tuning in, go back in hour one, because John had laid out a previous experience that he had that soured him. John was one of the founding members of Oathkeepers, and he left a while ago, and it was after this experience that he had where he felt something was going down and he was set up, and he didn't, he's not stupid. He's not going to allow them to set him up and take the fall. And like we were saying going into break, it would have been horrible because it would have been you and your security team engaging in live fire with, 17-year-old kids who were LARPing. And at the end of the day, it would have been, didn't you know they were LARPing? If you're such a good, if you were such a good cop, this and that, they would have thrown that in your face. You were a homicide detective. John's a smart guy, ladies and gentlemen. He's not dumb. He saw what they were doing to him. They were trying to totally hang him. Now the question is, who made that decision? So we're going to get into our thoughts on that, and you really don't know. I mean, honestly, it's hard to pinpoint because you weren't a fly on the wall, and it would be all hearsay at this point. But like John said, there were certain people in the command tent, I'm doing air quotes, in the command center handling things, and that would have been one Mr. Stuart Rhodes. So getting into Stuart, when all in all honesty, all openness, I've interviewed Stuart on my broadcasts over the years, but as I said earlier in hour one, he never talked about armed insurrection because he always said that's what they want. He understood that that's exactly what the powers that be want. They want you to get violent. It's like Martin Luther King Jr. said, they know how to handle violence. They want you to be violent. They don't know how to handle nonviolence. And that is where you make the biggest impact. in the minds of men and women, in, using intellectualism, using logic, not tribalism and emotion. That's what we're trying to fight against. So he understood that, and going all the way up to this broadcast that we did in 2020. And it was all about, like, again, self-reliance, getting food stores, not, cops and the military not violating the Constitution, not being willing to take part in, like a martial law FEMA camp type situation.
The message was nonviolence.
Yeah.
The message was nonviolence. And that's honestly what attracted me to the organization at the very beginning. Is we were gonna fix this by changing minds, not by arms. We already had arms because we were cops and soldiers. We were trying to change minds.
And that's what it was, John, up until, it was weird because I listened to that broadcast we did again today, and I was like, yeah, I didn't miss anything, and neither did John. We didn't miss a thing. He was normal. He sounded, now he could have been a sociopath or whatever behind the scenes. I've seen what his ex-wife says. I'm not going to say I take that with a grain of salt. She does have some insight, but I don't know that, are there any ulterior motives as to why she would come out? Was she paid to come out? I don't know. So you could take that with a grain of salt, and he might have very well been a sociopath behind the scenes. I don't know, but my interactions with him, he was always very nonviolent, none of that. It was anti that. It was like, don't let them goad you into doing that. You have to, we have to educate people so that we can avoid violence, self-sufficiency, get chickens, grow your own food. The most nonviolent of topics you could talk about. So then fast forward like 6 months, and I'm seeing, things that are being posted that he's saying, and I'm like, wait, what?
Well, Popeye, think about this. Okay, you've been around the block in the same circles that I have for a decade or more. Anytime I don't want to sound so generic, but it's almost like that way. Anytime you see one of these groups get rolled up by the feds, there's a pattern that emerges pretty quickly. And the organization is led by leaders. And at some point, group B people start coming in and things start changing and the organization goes a bad way and they end up doing something stupid. Okay. Follow the Michigan kidnap plot. I'm trying to think of another one that rolls up that way. You just look at them. Anytime the feds roll up a militia group or a right-wing group, that's how it happens. Okay. Now that we have the advantage of hindsight, I believe the same framework should be applied to what happened to the Oathkeepers, at least in theory. And so I want to go back and think about who was showing up at the time, earlier, before these changes were made. And I'm not pointing a finger because I don't know, but I'm applying logic. And the introduction of Whip, who was person 10 in the federal investigation, his name's Mike Simmons, according to Mother Jones. He was brought in 2019, 2020 by Stewart. He told a story to me that may or may not be true. When Stewart showed up at the DC First rally right after the election, he introduced Whip to me and to everybody else as a VP of the organization. But there's a problem with that. Number one, at that time, I didn't even know the guy's name. Number two, I'm on the board of directors of the organization, and while we don't have meetings real often, usually if a vice president or something is being voted upon, everybody kind of was there to vote on it. So I don't know who made this Whip person a vice president of Oathkeepers when, as far as I know, he wasn't even associated with the organization before 2020 or late 2019. Who was this guy? Where'd he come from?
Can I say his name? Is that's the same gentleman?
Mike Simmons is the name that Mother Jones said. The only name I heard from him at the Atlanta rally, somebody called him Mike. And I don't know if it's Stewart or somebody else. Somebody called him Mike. I was already told that basically nobody knew his name. Also, at the DC rally or the Atlanta rally, somebody told me, and I think it was Stewart, that Mike Simmons, person 10, whip, was an employee of Blackwater. Also had previously been an employee of Blackwater. Now, I've since been told by somebody else that that's almost certainly a lie. But I don't know, because I never worked for Blackwater, but I had somebody tell me that, and probably he's lying. The point is, this guy came in late in the game of the life of Oathkeepers, the evolution of Oathkeepers. He came in late in the game, and things went bad shortly after he was brought into the game, and he was brought into leadership without anybody knowing how or why. What does that say to you, Popeye? What does that say? What does it look like?
Looks like a fed plant. That's what it looks like.
Looks like a handler to me.
Yep.
So, but I don't know. If Whip may be a great guy. He may be a former police officer that was railroaded. He may be a former Blackwater employee, and he may be caught up in this like everybody else.
Now, I have another question. Since we're throwing names out there really quick, I want to ask you this else. Who is Ray Epps?
Well, before January 7th, I've never, or whenever his name appeared in the public after the January 6th debacle, was the first time I ever heard that name. Now, is it possible I stumbled across him on a chat somewhere, or maybe, but his name was not synonymous with anything Oathkeepers or Oathkeepers related, let alone being a state chapter leader. And also to kind of bring people up to speed, Oathkeepers, while it had an organizational structure, it was very loosely associated. A chapter in a state kind of handled their own business, and what was happening in Texas had really no bearing on what was happening in Arizona. So Arizona could have absolutely been a leader in Arizona, and he could have been God's gift to Oathkeepers in Arizona. But I can tell you, as the Texas leader in the early 20-teens, and as a board of directors member for 6 or 7 years, I never heard the name, and it meant nothing to me. In fact, all the people that were paraded out after January 6th, the ones that went inside the Capitol, I never heard these people. I never heard their names. They're calling them, Oathkeepers leadership and leaders of Oathkeepers, this and that. I never heard of these people. I never seen these people, which brings me back to kind of an issue I had with the organization from the very beginning. When I set up the Oathkeepers Facebook page and I turned it over to Oathkeepers, okay, within 6 months to a year, there was probably 20 different Oathkeepers organizations on Facebook. The real Oathkeepers, the 3% Oathkeepers, the real Oathkeepers. They were all over the place. And I told Stewart all the way back then, I said, Stewart, you're an attorney. You understand branding. You understand copyrights and, having to control your brand. I said, you've got people out there calling themselves Oathkeepers who are going to do something stupid, and it's going to blow back on you. I was telling him that back in 09 and 010. And it's going to blow back on this organization one day if you don't get control of your brand. You're an attorney. You need to start suing people and enforcing the naming rights of this organization, because you're setting yourself up for a fall. The people they trotted out, arresting them after January 6th, my best guess is that's kind of what happened here. You had a loose group of people who called themselves Oathkeepers. Just like anybody can call themselves a Christian, no matter what kind of worship they actually do, or they can call themselves a Buddhist, no matter what they do. You can call yourself an Oathkeeper, never having been a cop, never having been a soldier, never having owned a firearm, never done anything except maybe watched Red Dawn one time. You're now an Oathkeeper, okay? That's what I think at its core, as far as what happened on January 6th, the idiots that actually went inside and thought they were going to overthrow the federal government without a weapon or without training, without a force, without a plan. These people were not serious. They weren't serious men. They weren't serious women. They weren't serious people. They were impassioned people, probably. They thought they were fighting for a cause, and I don't know if that was Donald Trump or Q or what, but they weren't serious people. I don't even think they were really Oathkeepers. I don't know, because you know what? I haven't been privy to a membership roster of Oathkeepers ever. I asked for it a bunch of times. I never got it. So,
but Sarge, they had gear on, and they had a Velcro patch that said Oathkeepers. Doesn't that make it official?
Well,
I'm being sarcastic, by the way.
They were all trying to look tactical, They were all trying to look tactical. In the end, they were all just tactical.
Right. And, paintball players going back to, I'm 45 and going back to when I was 19, I used to play paintball. We used to go out to Jim Thorpe, PA, right? And I used to play paintball in the woods for entire weekends. And I can tell you, we used to play with Vietnam vets, and those guys looked tactical too, right? They were all geared up. They were real badasses paintballing. But then we also played with LARPers that looked tactical. And that's what I see when I see those guys.
Well, and once again, LARP. Remember the word LARP. Just like the Atlanta Antifa was a LARP, I think the January 6th Oathkeepers were a LARP.
The LARP's direction.
Yes. I don't think it was serious. It was all for public consumption. It was going to be no overthrow of the government.
Sarge, it was to make the whole thing, right, when that was going on, I said it, and you and I had conversations immediately, and I said, okay, I don't think any, even if it wasn't planned, there were obviously people that were on the ground that had planned it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Provocateurs, whoever, but the general mass public that was there, they didn't plan on that. They were driven like cattle, and all you need is certain people in the right positions to move the entire herd along. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory fashion. I'm saying I understand how the people that do things behind the scenes manipulate society. And that's what you saw that day. And the certain key actors were LARPing. I mean, the guy with the horns on his head, and they gave him 10 or 20-year sentence or something. And he's got a ridiculous sentence. And he's with the horns on his head. What they call him, the Q shaman?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And of course, Q, everyone's like, my God, Q, it's so dangerous. It's conspiracy theories against the government. I said this from day one, ladies and gentlemen. I've never changed my tune on this, ever. Anyone that knows me, I will never change my tune on it. Q is a psyop, okay? And my litmus test is 9/11. And when asked about 9/11, Q said, what did Q say? Q said what? Q said the official version of events is what happened. And check, please. Okay, I didn't believe it from the beginning because it was too good to be true. And when you put it to the test, it fails every time. Okay, I'm still waiting for the indictments, by the way. When are they coming in? They must be in the mail. I know the mail's taking longer to get here now, John, so the indictments must be in the mail. Q is a psyop. And it's easy to lump a lot of stuff. They lump 9/11 truth. They lump things about, child trafficking and all this other stuff together. And then it's easily after you wrap everything up under this umbrella, eventually you lead everybody along for a while till you get to the right point, and then you deflate that, you burst that bubble, you deflate the balloon, so to speak. And, it loses air because the argument is really BS. And then all the people that followed it, they either look stupid to the people that didn't believe it, and those people feel that they were correct. And the people that did believe it, a lot of them get very upset and they get dissuaded from looking into this stuff further because they think it's all conspiracy theory, crazy garbage, blah, blah, blah. But again, what did they charge Stewart Rhodes with? Conspiracy. So it's a legal charge. So wait, if it's a legal charge and I say conspiracy theory now to you, does that maybe have a different tone to it than, some crazy kook guy that thinks things are crazy? No, we're actually discussing real legal terms. John's a retired homicide detective. Do you think he'd come on, besmirch his name? He's an elected official currently. Do you think he would come on and besmirch his professional name on my broadcast? He's not making any money. I don't pay him to come on. I don't make any money doing this broadcast. So the two of us are in the wrong business if that was our goal. How is he benefiting from lying or making any of this up? He's not. He's not. See, conspiracy doesn't mean fake or trying to sell a book or Bigfoot or UFOs. It means two or more people getting together to do something bad. And if what we're saying happened on January 6th, well, then two or more people would have had to be involved. So just saying. Anyway, John, I think there were a lot of agent provocateurs that day, and I think there were useful idiots. Something that big, you need a conglomeration of different types. And then, of course, you had the general public itself was upset, and they knew that. They know how to harness that energy. And they did. They needed a physical meme to say, look, Trump supporters are violent. Anyone that follows the Constitution is violent. You're a terrorist. And then it's you're an anti-vaxxer. Oh, you're pro-freedom. You're a terrorist. The reason they needed a physical meme to refer to is just like with flat Earth. Right? Same thing. They didn't have, back in the day when you'd question about 9/11, they'd say, whoa, what do you believe? The earth is flat too? And you'd be like, no, nobody talks about that. What are you doing? Now that's a thing, right? Or it's kind of died back a little bit, thank God. But that was a thing for a minute where there were really intelligent people that were falling into that rabbit hole of misinformation. And the problem is now that meme in physical reality exists, so they can refer to it, and it's easier to use as a ad hominem attack or a straw man argument. Now you have the same thing with the faux insurrection, because that, again, I want you to remind yourselves, if this was really veterans, right? If this was really guys that had training, people that were pissed off, they're militia. My God, they're violent. They have guns. They have all this training. We should be so scared. If it was actually like that, if that is what was really happening, first of all, the videos don't support that. But if that's what was happening on January 6th, then we're pathetic. And how do we have all this military presence worldwide if those are our veterans? If that's what the training, that's what you get after all the years of training and combat experience, is that? Come on, stop it. Stop it right now. Stop it. Because that's not what a real insurrection would look like, okay? And everybody knows that. They needed a physical meme, and that's what that was about. That's my opinion. That's why that was rigged up. It was never meant to actually, there was no overthrow of the government. There was never a real threat of that. Although, and I'm not saying, by the way, that the senators and the congressmen and women are all in on it, or they all know it's fake, Popeye. No, they needed to experience that fear for real, at least as real as it could be to them, because they needed them to be trained. You know how they have the live action shooting drills in schools where they have an active shooting drill, and they don't tell often they won't tell the school, they won't notify them. So people come running in with guns and masks, and they don't know that some of them are actually police. And it's not, I'm not using this as a pejorative to bash cops and saying that happens. Okay. It's happened multiple times. Well, that's a psychological thing. There's a psychological element to that. So, now they've escalated it. They're doing it to the people of Congress. They get them all scared of the guy with the horns. I mean, okay, John, you're an elected official, right? You saw that some of these elected officials had firearms. Let me ask you a question. If you're an elected official, you're in a Capitol building, and the LARP Fest happens to you, as it happened exactly on January 6th, would you be terrified, and shaking your boots like AOC and some of these other people were supposedly, granted, they may have genuinely felt fear, and I did just say that was part of the idea behind the whole thing. But with what you saw that there were guys that had firearms, that were not just, there were some people, members of the U.S. government agencies that were in there. Yes, there were armed men, but there were also armed senators and congressmen and women in there. So if you were an armed public official, would you have been so fearful of what you witnessed, or would you be more fearful of a real insurrection?
Well, I mean, if anybody inside that building thought it was a real insurrection, they've never actually studied history before. If I was a member of the Senate and what happened on January 6th happened, the only thing I would be mad about is where the hell was the Capitol Police? Where the hell was the National Guard, the DC National Guard? This is the best the American government can do This is it. All these people without weapons have overrun the entire capital of the United States without anybody pushing back. I'd have been pissed off at the security. But I want to pivot to a different direction real fast. What bugs me also about what happened after January 6th and what happened a couple of days ago is this indictment that they indicted Stewart Rhodes and 9 other supposed members of Oathkeepers on. And my understanding is that the only person that was not already in jail in yesterday's indictments was Stuart Rhodes himself. Quick sidebar. The only person also that wasn't charged notably would have been Whip, person number 10, who was very active apparently on January 6th as well in D.C. But he's escaped indictment thus far. But let's look at the indictment. The indictment's like 40 pages, 45 pages long. It covers 10 different defendants, which means they're basically given about 4 pages apiece after your introduction or in the very beginning. The problem I have, a couple of things. The underlying idea of a sedition charge, at least the part of the statute they appear to be using, is they were impeding an official proceeding of the government, blah, 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 blah. The problem with that charge is that my understanding is only 5 people actually ever entered the Senate chambers. And I also understand that not a single person who they know entered the Senate chambers was a member or claimed to be a member of Oathkeepers. So if Oathkeepers were not the ones charging into the Senate to stop the Senate proceeding, which is the official government action that was supposedly interfered with, you've got no sedition charge. It didn't happen. Had they merely had a few officers posted outside the Senate chambers, the certification election could have taken place just like it was scheduled. They chose to delay it to, I guess, enjoy the LARP Fest. On top of that, while the sedition charge is the most important charge of the document, the most voluminous of the charges has to do with tampering with evidence or destroying evidence. And this is the bridge too far right here. In the indictment, they're claiming that Stewart Rhodes and these other people, after the events of January 6th, and I'm not even sure if they're claiming, because I don't have it right in front of me, if they're claiming they were doing this on the afternoon of the 6th or the night of the 6th or the morning of the 7th or in a couple of days after. I don't know what it is. But a lot of the charges, the majority of the charges, are that they destroyed evidence on their digital devices of their crimes and that they knew or should have known that they were under investigation, which is why it's a crime. The problem is, especially for the people who didn't actually go into the Capitol or do anything inside the Capitol, they had no expectation they had broken the law. They had no idea that the entire Capitol grounds had been, summarily determined to be a restricted area when it's actually a public place, a public building. So the Stewart Rhodes, let's just say Stewart for now. Stewart Rhodes deleted something off his cell phone late in the afternoon on January 6th, and they're charging him for destroying evidence. How in God's green earth would Stewart Rhodes, who has been doing what he's been doing in one form or another for 10 years, unimpeded, how is it he can delete a video or a text message shortly after January 6th, and then retroactively, a year later, we're going to say, you should have known you were going to be under investigation. It's against the law that you deleted that. Another problem with the indictment. I challenge anybody to pull up some other federal indictments and compare them to this indictment. Indictments contain things. It's called detailed information. Dates, times, people, locations, statutes that were broken with specificity. Even if you take for a second their claims that he was destroying evidence and that he should have known that he had broken the law, and he should have known he shouldn't have done that. Pardon me. How was he supposed to know? He didn't. So you can't charge him with that. Or you can. I mean, you can charge him with whatever you want. You can indict a ham sandwich. And with a DC jury, you might actually get a conviction. But the important thing is, if you compare that indictment to other indictments in other cases, you will see a distinct difference. There is no paragraph that I read in that indictment that said, on January 6th at 12:45 in the afternoon, one Elmer Stewart Rhodes deleted a video of him assaulting a cop in front of the Capitol building on his cell phone. And that was deleted on this date and time. Doesn't happen. They say he deleted some stuff to cover up his crimes. That's the gist of the detail of that part of the indictment. That's not an indictment. That's nothing. That's crap. So either they threw this indictment together real fast, wanting to change the narrative because January 6th's narrative is collapsing, or if they wanted to throw something together real fast because the OSHA mandate for the vaccine was about to get overturned and they needed a throwdown indictment. I don't know if it was that or if they really just don't have a case. But what they turned in for the indictment on Stewart and those other 10 guys who were already in jail is a bunch of crap. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing what comes out of this, because you generally don't put people in prison for 20 years for sedition when you can't make the very basic tenets of the statute that they're supposedly breaking. It doesn't add up. It's not congruous. And if he has a half-decent attorney and he survives to trial, wink, wink, he actually, I think, has a good chance of getting off, of winning, of being acquitted. Sedition charges historically in the American judicial system are very hard to prove, especially when you consider that the federal court system has roughly a 90% conviction rate. I think if you look at sedition over the last 100 years, that rate's probably about 30% or 40%. So if Stewart could survive the trial and gets a decent attorney, I'd give him pretty good chances. But that's if and if. So that's
right.
That.
And we've discussed that off air as well, where will it go to trial? Will it be another Epstein type situation? Do I think that Stewart was evil all the way going back, to the beginning, and that Oathkeepers is some sort of long con? No. I think that at some point, and it has to have been since the last time that I interviewed him 2 years ago till now. That's why I went back and listened to that broadcast, so I could, like I said to you off air, I was like, did I miss something? Did John miss something? And you were like, yeah, what the, did we miss something? And that's why you messaged me. Like, did you notice anything? And I was like, no, there's nothing we missed. He was normal. It was the same stuff. And then fast forward, it was like within I don't know, 6, 7, 8 months, it was very different speak. So maybe he was at a point, maybe he got compromised, maybe he got pinched. However, I mean, the feds will bring you in on something, and then they'll have you work for them. This has happened time and time again. This is not something that's only written in the movies. Where do you think the movies get the idea from? Because it happens in real life. So they could have gotten him one way or another, carrot or stick, whatever approach they used. And they just needed him to not even physically take part and walk up into it. They just needed him to be verbal and direct. And even if he wasn't, and he could have been, he could have been choosy about how he said it or did it or whatever. My point is, he could have. I don't think that from the beginning of Oathkeepers, the inception of Oathkeepers, that this was going on. I think this happened in the past 2 years, and he was used. And now that he is no longer useful to them, now that they have what they feel they need, they have the special committee, and they're going to solve it in DC. Well, now that they have this, he's served his purpose. And what happens when the useful idiot serves their purpose? The powers that shouldn't be, John. They throw them under the train. And I think that's what's happening to him. And I'm not making excuses for him. I'm not defending him. He shouldn't have taken part in any of that. He should have stuck to what he used to be. It's one of the reasons why I totally disassociated from Oathkeepers, was because all of a sudden it was fine, and all of a sudden it took this radical bent that I did not like. And I got to be honest, I even said to you, I didn't agree with you guys going out on the streets and putting yourselves in physical danger and being barriers, at certain events. And I even said to you, homie, I love you, but I do not agree with this. And it wasn't like, you're being an idiot. It was like, I was worried that like something was going to happen. And I didn't like the direction of things, even at that point, because I was like, why is it suddenly getting shifted into exactly what they've been saying they're not for all these years? And then you had your event and you talked to me right after, and you were very upset. And ladies and gentlemen, John was very, very genuinely upset about what he went through. And for him to leave, he sticks by what he does. When he puts his name on something, he only puts his name on something that he wholeheartedly believes in. And knowing him and being friends with him for so many years, I understood that was a huge step that he did that. And, for me, I can cut and run from, Oathkeepers. It's not that big of a deal for me. But for him, he was much deeper into the organization, at the time, or at least in the beginning. And he was a very vocal advocate of the organization. So for him to like give up 10 years of association with an organization like that he put his heart into, at times, that's a big deal. But it was because all of a sudden it went from the regular speak of, again, self-reliance, nonviolence, education, using logic. It went from that to the LARP fest. And what happened on January 6th, I said it before and I'll say it again. It only takes a few people, John, in the right positions to just herd everybody. Now they have their physical meme. People saw it. It happened. I mean, was it an insurrection? No. Are people calling them on that? Is all this, crying on the anniversary of it and everything else? It's all theater. That's political theater. But they need to do that. Even my cat sneezed in the background. Poom's just totally agreed, and he just sneezed and said it is. It's total BS. Good boy. It's ridiculous, John. This whole thing is ridiculous. It's a LARP fest from beginning to end. It's pathetic, but they needed to do it. They being the powers that shouldn't be. You understand the bigger picture. So you get, when I say that, what they're doing. And you have these people now, everyone's like, yeah, these insurrectionists. I see in the comments, people are like, we should lock all the Trump supporters and anybody that thinks that wasn't an insurrection up in camps. And I'm like, wait, what? You mean the camps that didn't exist? Right? That you called me a conspiracy theorist over? You want to lock people up in those camps? I thought they didn't exist. But anyway, I digress. So back to January 6th. Your thoughts on where it's going to go from here? Like, what do you see?
Well, I mean, I see the January 6th committee, continuing to attempt to make something out of nothing, or to make something out of something that wasn't. And I don't see them prospering. I see this kind of being caught up in the malaise of DC until the 2022 elections, and I think it's going to slowly go away from there. As far as what happens to Stewart or the others, I hope they get good attorneys. Stewart needs it. Stewart was a friend of mine. I don't know if I got stabbed in the back. I don't know if he got pulled in the wrong direction. I don't know what happened. I just know that near the end of my tenure with the organization, I didn't recognize the organization that I had helped establish. And so for me to turn my back on that organization in 24 hours, it's pretty significant. And I haven't talked to anybody about this since then. I've been sitting on this story for a year. A lot of that year, my wife has been sick, so it's been like impossible for me to want to talk about it. But I've been sitting on this information and I've been rolling it over in my head, and I go back and forth on what I think actually happened. But I try to come at it from an investigator's viewpoint. I pulled together the information I have, and if you don't have enough information to draw conclusions, you just don't draw those conclusions. And so I don't draw conclusions. I don't know who was actively involved in trying to set me up. I don't know who was actively involved in planning whatever the government thinks was planned on January 6th. I can say that there was the time that I was around the Oathkeepers prior to January 6th in Atlanta and D.C., nobody was talking about insurrection. Nobody's talking about fighting the government. Nobody's talking about armed takeover of the Capitol. That's craziness. If someone would have said that in front of me, I probably would have I may have just kicked their butt right there, because that's something a Fed says. That's something that somebody says when they want to get people in trouble. And that's what I wasn't about. And I wasn't going to sit there. I wouldn't sit there and let somebody talk about it. And I'm not going to sit here and honestly let somebody disparage the founding idea of Oathkeepers, of what it was about, because it wasn't about insurrection. It was about nonviolent changing of minds in order to affect the betterment of our country, and to keep our peace officers, to keep our soldiers firmly rooted to their purpose, their real purpose, and not the purpose that the government wants to push upon them. But Oathkeepers is done, and I don't think it needs to be resurrected. I don't think somebody needs to pick up the banner. Officers and soldiers out there, pick up your Constitution and read it. It's not a long document. You can probably read it in about an hour. Read about the founding fathers. Read their thoughts on government power, on use of government violence. Read what they think about those things. Treat every person you come into contact with as an individual. Remember their individual rights. But don't let the events of January 6th negate the good, because we don't yet have the evidence to really even identify the bad. And if everybody's learned one thing since Trump got involved in politics, we can all agree, or at least most of us thinking people can agree, that the media lies to you. And if you think for 1 second that what they're reporting on the arrest of Stewart Rhodes isn't going to be wildly different 6 months from now, or Stuart Rhodes could be a free man 6 months from now, it could possibly and actually could happen, because that's the way things have happened in the last several years. The mainstream media and the government pushes a narrative, and they figure out shortly after the American people aren't going to believe it and put up with the BS. So you know what? I'm gonna sit back and watch what happens, but my hope is that other people who experienced small pieces of this bigger puzzle that we're never going to know. If we're going to rely on the government to tell us what happened, we're never going to know the truth. Okay, the only way we're going to know the truth is for the people who were actually involved in this stuff and saw things with their own eyes and their own ears to speak up, write about it, talk about it publicly. Maybe one day we can patch together this tapestry of individual experiences and finally actually figure out what really did happen. Who did plan this? We don't know. So I want to know, and this is my piece of the puzzle. And I'm very disappointed that I've finished out my tenure with this organization, and to watch it implode so spectacularly it's very upsetting. But I don't consider the time wasted, because I think in the 10 years we've taught officers a lot, and I think we've avoided a lot of other issues that could have caused more deaths and more destruction and more anger between the police and the public, which is what I don't want. I want the police to be serving the public, and for the public to support them, and to not have these incidents that causes this. But I'm waxing poetic, pardon me.
No, feel free to wax poetic, brother. You know how it is on my show. You come on. It's not a host guest thing. It's like two brothers hanging out, having a conversation, drinking beers, breaking down all this, because that's the relaxed atmosphere. Anyway, it is with you and I, but that's the atmosphere that this kind of stuff needs to be talked in a relaxed tone, not in this, oh my God, putting out anxiety, anything like that. Look, what's going on is we've been talking about this for years. This is stuff that we've predicted, so to speak, with the police state, that kind of stuff, what you see going on politically in Washington. So it's nothing, there's nothing new under the sun, as the Masons would say. So there's no point in screaming about it. The sky is falling. No one's going to listen to you when the sky really is falling. If you run around and scream from the top of the roof at 100 decibels, you got to be calm, and we got to have relaxed conversations about these kind of things. Because the last thing we need to do is put out that energy. That's what they want. They want people to be riled up, so they do more stuff. Again, there are people out there that will engage in the LARP fest on both sides. It's not conservatives. It's not just the Antifa kids.
Forget the labels. Just forget the labels.
Yeah, stop it. It's both sides. There's LARPers on both sides. And at a deeper level, there are agents provocateur on both sides. Okay. And actually, it's not both sides. At the end of the day, the left and right is really controlled by the same puppet master. So think about that for a moment. If you have the same puppet master controlling both puppets, then everything branches off of that. Well, why would that be? Well, that's because they want everybody to argue amongst each other over things like this. Now people are divided. Oh, you support January 6th? You're a terrorist. That's a sacred institution. They tried stopping certifying the vote. How about hijacking the election? How about that? Oh, that didn't happen. You're a conspiracy theorist. First of all, the Democrats didn't think it was a conspiracy theory when they were going after Bush for doing it, right? They didn't have any problem in the early 2000s going after George W. Bush for stealing the election. And of course, he didn't steal it. Everyone's like, you really think he's the mastermind? No, I don't. I think Darth Vader, his vice president, was heavily involved in things. Yes, Dick Cheney, the guy who lived for over 4 years without a heart. Think about that for a moment. Anyway, that guy was evil. I don't think George W. was in charge of anything. But yeah, they stole the election. Go look at HBO did a documentary. HBO. Is HBO known as a conservative leaning outlet, ladies and gentlemen? No, they're not. Last time I checked, they're not. So they did a documentary called Hacking Democracy with a lady named Bev Harris. My friend Joe Joseph, you heard Joe on the show last week. He's going to be coming here to KGRA in the coming weeks. Okay. Joe interviewed her years ago. He had Bev Harris on his show, and he interviewed her, and he talked all about the documentary, all about how you could steal elections. This was years and years before Donald Trump was even the president. Okay. That's how long ago this was. This is going back to like 2012 or 2013. And I know Joe's tuned in right now listening, but he could attest to this if he were on air right now. It was him and his co-host, Tim, and they had her on for it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And they went over all of this in detail. It exists. The evidence of hacking an election exists, but they want you to think that you're crazy and you're a conspiracy nut if you think that they stole the election. Now, of course they want Joe Biden in, and whether or not Trump was put in for a purpose, and then once he served his purpose, they got rid of him. There's a million different ways that could have gone. And I know I'm not attacking anybody for their, supporting Trump or not supporting Trump, whatever. Okay. But Biden was the one that was supposed to be in right now because they needed him. Why? Because look at him. That's why. Because he's inept. first of all, what they're doing is elder abuse. And because he's old and he's senile, so they put him up. Everybody focuses on him. Oh, what a nice old man. You can't pick on the old man, right? Oh, he's a nice old man and he may have memory issues. That's mean. You can't be mean. So they can hide behind, even if we all know that's BS, they can hide behind that. Meanwhile, because of the younger generation who they're appealing to, because they want their votes coming up, right? Well, they can play to that. And while they're doing that, the people that are really running things are people behind the scenes. And I don't mean Kamala Harris, because she couldn't work her way out of a wet paper bag. She's just a horrible, horrible vice president. But it's the people behind them. They're showpieces. Why do you think all the attention is on those two? Because they want you to look at them. They don't want you to look at the people behind the scenes. Anyway, I digress. So, John, I know we only have a few short minutes here left. I'm glad that you came on with me tonight to talk about this whole thing and go over your thoughts. Like I said, I don't think that Stewart, was some sort of evil plant and there was some sort of long game or anything like that. And people are like, well, he's a Fed. Well, it doesn't mean he's like a badge carrying Fed. He just he could have been turned. And it happens to a lot of people. It happened to a lot of people that were involved with Anonymous. When Anonymous first got busted like 10 years ago, right? And they got probably 8 or 10 years ago now. I have to look and see exactly what year it was, but they got the original group of the anonymous hackers got busted on. A lot of them got turned. And in turn now, that's why I've had hackers on over the years that have said, anything that when you hear the government, Anonymous did this or Anonymous did that, it's probably a Fed run operation. That's how they turn people. So it could have been something as simple as that. I don't know. All I know is that the language and the speech that was coming out from him and from his camp changed drastically in such a short period of time that John completely cut, and especially after his whole after his debacle with what happened there, he left. But I was already kind of I want to distance myself. I don't agree with that. And then John right around the same time had this experience and he left. And then shortly months later, this whole faux surrection happens. I'm glad that you were not involved with him. I'm glad that you have not been dragged through the mud by this crap.
Me too. Absolutely, me too. And I'm an unashamed Christian believer, and I believe God was involved, and so I'm very thankful for that. Something just jogged back into my memory about Atlanta that I hadn't thought about a whole lot. But, after the events of that afternoon, of course, I was a little upset with Stewart. And that evening, myself and my teammates were just kind of hanging around downtown Atlanta in our vehicle just in case something happened. Because, it's happened multiple times in these Trump rallies where after dark, Antifa comes back out and creates more mayhem and tries to track people down that are still out, I guess, enjoying the night air. Well, we were out looking, or hanging out waiting for Antifa to cause trouble if they did, and they didn't in the end, and so nothing happened. But while we were there, Stewart was bugging me on my cell phone for like an hour, and he was up in the Omni Hotel, he said, with Ali Alexander. And I'm assuming you've heard that name. He was one of the guys who was integral in setting up the rallies in D.C. And I think he actually was the person who applied for the permit, or his group applied for the permit for the Capitol grounds on January 6th. So a guy who was involved in the planning of the actual January 6th day, okay? He met with Ali Alexander in the Omni Hotel for several hours that evening. And he was bugging me repeatedly. He wanted me to come up there and meet Ali and have a drink. He said Ali wanted to meet me. So he's like, he was stroking my ego and stuff. And after me already being pissed off at him for what happened earlier in the day and not having yet totally wrapped my head around what happened, I was like, I'm here to protect people. I'm here to help people if they get in trouble or if Antifa causes a problem. I'm not here to go drink with somebody and hobnob. That's not why I was there. But to me, that little tidbit Actually, I don't think I've said that to anybody yet. To me, that's important because that's actually, if you want to get technical, a link between Stewart Rhodes in January. I haven't yet heard or seen another actual, the genesis of anything involving January 6th with Stewart Rhodes. All I know is I can say with good authority that Stewart told me on the evening of the Atlanta rally, he was meeting with Ali Alexander up in somewhere in the Omni Hotel in downtown Atlanta. I don't know what they were talking about. I don't know what all they did. All I know is that he was trying to get me to come up there. And after what I experienced that day, I wasn't about to go hang out with him. And I sure as heck wasn't going to go hang out with him to try to hobnob with somebody. Now, in retrospect, the conspiracy theorist in me looks back now and goes, holy crap, was he trying to get me involved in something in Atlanta that had to do with January 6th? I don't know.
He's probably Stewart's Fed handler. That's probably.
I don't know. I hate the idea of everybody calling everybody else feds. I hate that. It's, they're really.
Well, you know what I mean. He could be, associated doesn't mean he's a badge carrying Fed. He could be associated in another way. He could be used too, but.
Or maybe it was going to be used so that they could later besmirch Ali Alexander because he met with Stewart Rhodes. I mean, it could go either way. The point is, you've got all these little disparate pieces of information, little disparate things that happened that I can't make sense of, but somebody else can. Somebody else might hear my story and think, you know what? I didn't do exactly what he was doing, but I was in the same area and this is what I saw. I'm hoping other people will come forward and say, this is what I saw. This is what I saw. This is what I saw. And we can put together what really happened, because I don't know what really happened. What I know is that the Oathkeepers that's not what the organization was about. So for them to paint the Oathkeepers as a violent organization who wanted to take over the country or overthrow the government, that's like space cadet stuff. That's crazy. And and I said this on Alex Jones, I'm going to say it here. If you read the indictment that they indicted Stewart and 10 others with trying to overthrow the government, if you read that indictment and you believe it and you think what they're saying is honest, well, then in my opinion, Stewart Rhodes needs to be found not guilty by reason of insanity, because that is not a plan to take over the government. That's a plan to get caught and thrown in prison. And a moron can look at what they're accused of doing and say, if you really think this person was doing this with the serious intent of overthrowing the government, you're crazy. Stewart Rhodes, if he really thought what that indictment says, if he really did that and he really thought that was going to overthrow the government, then Stewart Rhodes is insane and needs to be put in an asylum and get treatment, not thrown in prison. But I posit that it's a bunch of bullshit. Period.
Well said, Sarge. Well said. And dropping truth and information right to the very end. I have to cut us off, unfortunately, because the end of the broadcast is coming up. And I wish, if we had another hour, we could get into this guy. But I know you also have a lot of other stuff that's way more important than discussing this. You have to go take care of Kendra. And I appreciate your time and the 2 hours that you sacrificed. And again, Kendra, thank you so much. I hope you get better. Hugs, prayers, love to you and everybody out there. Wish her some love. John, thank you so much for your time, my brother.
My pleasure.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's it. We are out of time. So I will see you all again live next week. And until